why she's saying that she leaving.
Yo, I don't know.
I'm an organ donor. I slide up in if you let me into your heart, and I'm sure you won't forget me, cause we got one love. Use deuce for trouble times, 40 suffice. I can get nice and pay the crime. Black dye wine, running game like Jackie Warner. Used the first to act ill, and the first to point the pointer, man. You feel it's real, yeah, you feel it's real. From the bottom of my heart to the top of the steel, from the appetizer to the main course meal. I think of you on 2 occasions, and you know the deal.
So how many people you had yesterday?
50 on site, and then we have more than 500 online. We did live.
Magda, this is very serious. I thought there will be 20 people max.
That's really like another scale.
We did live broadcast, so there were more than 500. Yeah. So
How
let's
many
see.
From
Hopefully
China or
mostly China. Yes. Yes.
good.
Yes.
I just wanted to double check one thing, because sometimes I do need headphones, and sometimes when I wear them, the sound is really bad.
Can you hear me now properly?
A little bit. Your voice is quite low compared to when you do not wear.
If this is better, or this?
It's quite weak. Your
Okay,
voice.
So I will just.
So I will not use it. Like with Zoom, I don't know why there is a problem with
Much
Zoom.
better.
So Magda, I've just took a look at your question where it would be the most suitable to show the slides. Maybe the first one when you ask about the 60s and 90s, which is very
Yes.
much about this display. So
Yeah.
maybe I spent some moments and you know showing this slide.
As you wish. I mean, like Carol will be showing the slides with the first thing, the first question, which is really like to ask you to reflect on the text. But we can start with yours with another question. That's also fine. What do you think, Carol?
I think let's start with Zdenka's, with your, so I was gonna say something about the format. So my colleague Rory will introduce the conversation and Magda in Chinese, and then she will hand it to Magda, and then Magda will introduce both of us and how you will do the opening.
Okay, you did tell me this. I thought that she will introduce all of us. No.
Okay. Do you have our bios? I don't think
No.
you need bios. You just say something. It's just brief.
I can send you Magda if you like.
No. I know something, so you don't need to.
I can get Rory to send it to you right now.
Okay.
Rory can send it to you.
Okay.
Oh, please wait a moment. I will send you by email.
You can send it also in the chat in Zoom, right?
Oh,
Rory?
yeah.
You can also send it in the chat.
I can also see the ambassador is online. Alenka, ambassador. Do you want to say a few words at the beginning?
No, it's not it. Hello, Zdenka.
Hi, Alenka. How are you?
Everything fine. And look who is on my right side.
We already said hi.
And hello, Magda. We are meeting for the first time.
Hello. Yes, hello.
Great.
I'm saying
so
goodbye.
I think, Magda, whenever you come to this question on the 60s and 90s at the beginning or somewhere in between, then I can show the slides, I think.
Okay.
Because I think it would be interesting to say some words about this division between modern and contemporary. But this is, we'll see also in the conversation. I
Yes.
also don't want to spend much time on the slides, then it becomes like a lecture.
Yeah, that's true. So since we still have like a few minutes, will you excuse me for a second? I will just take some water. And I will be back in a minute.
So who is in the room with Alenka? There is a third person there.
The third person is here.
Who else there is
Take it just a second. Yes.
Hello.
Wow.
Yeah, so we have a listening room here. Installed. Yeah.
Super nice.
No. Ja. Ej, hvala, Zdenka.
Nikaj.
Ja.
Kdaj se vidimo punce spet? Moramo organizirati en žur, ko pridete.
Čim prej, glej, nekam moramo iti na nek retreat.
Na retreat. Ja, veš kako je?
Nujno.
Povem potem, ker zdaj se bo začelo, ne, tako da ne smem motiti, ampak mislim, da ima tale Kerol eno idejo za razstavo dokumentacije Igorja Zabela v muzeju.
Aha, ok.
Kaj? Ja. In me zanima, če ti bo rekla in razmišlja, če bi bila ti pripravljena to kurirati.
Ja, ne pove, veš kaj, odvisno kaj, ne?
Ja, seveda. Kam so pa zdaj vsi šli?
Pa res.
Zdaj so vsi nekam šli, ura. Ja, saj imamo še 5 minut, vse je v redu. Aha.
Rory je poslala bio, ne, da bojo, ne vem, kdo je očital. Mislim, da Magda. Ja.
Ok, potem mi lahko rečem, da naj pove, kaj želi, kako si predstavlja, kakšni so pogoji in tako naprej, a ne?
Ja, seveda, ne pove, pa bomo pol naprej, ne?
Ja. Eno, a veš, kaj je bila taka fajn prilika, no? Da je retreat v Pekingu, zato sem mislila.
Ja, absolutno.
Ja, a veš.
Kdaj bi pa to bilo?
Glej, po mojem letu.
Časa si še ti tam, to je bistveno vprašanje.
Zdaj ti lahko povem, da je vse jasno. Jaz sem do konca julija naslednje leto. Tako da zdaj smo bolj relaksirani. Zdaj je kar nekaj časa. Za tisti seminar, ko smo pa rekli, bo pa itak, ampak tisto bo pa kasneje. Ker ne bo takrat, ko pride ven knjiga, ne, to bo nekaj časa se še trajalo, to bo po mojem čez drugo spomlad. Ja, ti si videla, Aleksandra, včeraj prostore tam, ne? In kako je bila narejena tista razstava dokumentacija?
Ja, v bistvu, ja, v redu prostor, veš, tako, ja. Mislim, taka čista arhitektura je, tako da, mislim, za nek tak karakter, jaz ne vem zdaj v bistvu, ali se je to že kdaj razstavljalo, ta Igor Zabel, kakšen arhiv ali kaj? Zdenka, vi delate kaj s tem arhivom?
A misliš v Ljubljani? Ne vem, če se kaj dela. Vse društvo Igor Zabel, mislim, da so izdali, oni so izdali vse njegove knjige, vse njegove teksti so izdani, mislim, da v glavnem tudi prevedeni. Tako da oni imajo najboljši v bistvu pregled nad tem, ne?
Ne, veš, kaj je bilo zanimivo, ne, ker včeraj jaz, ko sem se s Kerol spoznala, ne, tako v prvih 2 minutah je v bistvu citirala Zabela, no. A veš, to je bil en tak zelo zanimiv moment, a veš, da ti srečaš na sredi Pekinga nekoga, ki je tako dobro informiran o praksi nekega
Ja,
kurata.
lepo, ja, super.
Ja. Tako da mislim, da tu nekako
bomo videli, kaj bo rekla, veš, mislim, tako čist neko arhivsko razstavo verjetno mene ne bi zanimalo delati, ampak mogoče se lahko kako drugače zmenimo. A veš, kaj pol je to, kaj, fotke z razstav, teksti.
Ja. Ali pa je na tebi, ne, veš, na kak način v bistvu tretiraš ta arhiv danes, ne?
Ja, glej, bomo videli, kaj bo rekla, brez veze, da zdaj pademo v to debato.
Ja, tik pred zdaj, preden se začenja pogovor, zdaj pa taka velika debata o naslednji stvari. Ja.
Ok, vso srečo, no?
Vso srečo, fajn pogovor. Wishing you a great conversation.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So it's about 1 minute, and shall we start start now or later on time?
On time.
Okay.
I can see already 192 people are watching.
This is really a different scale.
Really?
We also have audiences on YouTube.
Okay.
Yeah, that's 5:30. Let's start. Hello, everyone. Welcome to our Beijing Conversations. This is the third event, and this is an event organized by Beijing Inside Out Art Museum and the Embassy of the Republic of Slovenia in Beijing. And on December 9th, we had the first, last year, we had the first event joined by Zhu Panchichi and Professor Zhao Jinghua. They had discussed about their opinions on conspiracy. And the second event was held yesterday in Beijing Inside Out Art Museum by our dearly photography historian and Zhou Denyan and Alexandra White, an artist and a photography educator, on the topic of rethinking photography as a medium in the age of uncertainties. And today we have two guests, and Magda will be our moderator. I will give a brief introduction about our moderator, Magda. She is a curator and art theorist currently working at the Museum of Modern Art in Warsaw, where she curated and co-curated exhibitions such as Who Will Write the History of Tears? Artists on Women's Rights, and other exhibitions. And she also contributed to numerous publications like Points of Convergence, Alternative Views on Performance. She is currently working together with Slowkowski on the post-conference publication Was Socialist Realism Global? Modernism, Shock-Modernism, Socially Engaged Figuration, which will be published this year. Now I will give the floor to Magda. Welcome.
Thank you, Rory. Thank you for the introduction, and thank you, Carol, for this invitation. I was really thrilled when Carol wrote me, because I know her and Zdenka since a while, and they both were always, their work was always an inspiration for my own practice. So I wanted to start with a short introduction of Zdenka and Carol. And then I will maybe say a few words how the three of us met, never really in the same time and place, but independently, because this might be also an important context for our conversation. So Zdenka Badovinac is a curator, critic, and writer. She's currently the director of the Museum of Contemporary Art in Zagreb in Croatia. Between 1993 and 2021, she served as a director of the Museum of Modern Art in Ljubljana. Zdenka curated numerous exhibitions, and I will not be listing them all because it will take us too much of time. It's important to add that Zdenka was also a founding member of Internationale, a confederation of the European museums and art institutions. She also served as a board member of the International Committee for Museum and Collections of Modern Art from 2005 and 2010. Carol Yinghua Lu is a curator and art critic and writer based in Beijing. She is right now a director of Inside Out Museum in Beijing. She served in 2005 as a China Research for Asia Art Archive, and also curated many exhibitions. One of them was the 7th Shenzhen Biennial. She was also part of the selection panel for the 54th Golden Lion Award at the Venice Biennial. And she was also a co-artistic director of Roundtable, the 9th Guangzhou Biennial. So that's the official introduction. I think it would be also important to say how we met. So Carol and I met probably in 2016, maybe 2017, during my first visit to China. And I remember this was a Saturday morning, and I came to the museum to see their show Salon Salon. And Carol and Luding gave me a tour, which lasted for like several hours. So we stayed, after visiting the exhibition, we stayed in their office and we talked till the late afternoon. And I need to say that this conversation was also an inspiration for me to start my own research on the global perspective on socialist realism, of which the publication will be out soon. Zdenka is a very different story, because Zdenka was always a role model for me and for many of my colleagues in Eastern Europe. She was one of the most important curators and theoreticians of Eastern European art, what it is and how it differs from the Western art histories that we knew. Zdenka was also a founder of the Arte East 2000 plus collection, which for me as a new curator in the Museum of Modern Art in Warsaw was also a huge inspiration in terms of how to basically think, collect, and theorize Eastern Europe, like the art from the region. Zdenka is also a founding member of Internationale, and it is only a few years ago when the Museum of Modern Art joined Internationale Confederation that we first met. So we share some interests, and we shared some like stories, but as I said, we never met. And I think that this conversation is really important for me for two reasons. First of all, because as I said, like the interest in theorizing Eastern Europe was always present in my curatorial practice, but was also very important for the institution I work in, the Museum of Modern Art. But also on the other hand, go and relating it to China, our common history in terms of being countries ruled by communism is a common ground that I think is very rarely reflected upon. And on the other hand, I also feel that the global South, or that the Far East and the Eastern Europe rarely meet and talk and exchange. If they do, this is always going through the West somehow. So these opportunities to have a conversation face to face and to be able to compare and maybe also discuss our local situation is really unique and important. But I wanted to start with the title of this series, What is a Contemporary Art? As you all probably know, the title of this series comes from a IFLAG's journal, 11th, if I'm not mistaken, published in 2009, where Karol and Zdenka were both contributors, and they were asked to write a text from their local position on what is contemporary art. And the reason why IFLAGs wanted to ask this question was that they tried to build a wiki archive of contemporary art. And in order to do so, they were asking themselves a question, what would be a common ground, or how to make a menu search, what kind of system could they apply to search through contemporary art. And they realized that there is nothing like that. They could not divide contemporary art according to movements, because for a long time there were no important art movements already, and they also couldn't divide art practices according to the medium, because a lot of artists use very different medium at the same time. So a category of medium does not apply either. And in a way they failed. So they didn't build the archive back at the time, but these questions and this failure basically like triggered the reflection, what actually contemporary art is and how could it be categorized. So I wanted to start by asking Zdenka and Karol to reflect on your text written back in 2009. So it's like after 12 years. What has changed for you since? And how do you perceive what you wrote in 2009? Is it something that you still think is valid for art today, or did that situation change? Zdenka, maybe you would like to start. Or Zdenka, you are muted.
Okay, sorry. Thank you very much, Magda, for your very nice introduction. And I think it's a very important subject of today's conversation on contemporary. Yeah, 2009, it seems really deep past already, you know. If we try to remember what has happened after 2009, you know, we experienced some crucial crises that one would expect that they changed our perspectives and also our views on what is contemporary and how to understand it. So if we had, of course, in 2015, we had the refugee crisis started, and in Poland, the authoritarian regime that later came also to Slovenia in a very specific way. And then we had also a pandemic, and the crises normally are the crucial parameters, the crucial thing that somehow define how to go on, how to understand the world, new imaginaries, and so on. Yeah, I think what I wrote at that time in 2009, and it was a year before the Confederation International, l'International, how we call it in French, because it's after this workers' anthem. So what has changed? I think that the basic issue on contemporary, how I understood it, at least at that time, is almost the same. I think that I started that text with relating my writing to the very invitation of the eFlux editors, and with the question what I should write and so on. And immediately when I was invited, I thought it would be crucial to relate to my specific local institutional experience. So I would maybe today use a slightly different terminology. So I would say that my experience writing contemporary was very situated. So it's a term that we today use in our Confederation International. And the term that we didn't use at that time, I don't know why, it was taken from Dora Haraway's text from '89 that I didn't read in the 90s, but I think it would be very important for me, to be aware about her writing. I was not, I have to admit, and at least not about that very text, which is, I see how important it could have been to somehow to use more feminist theories already in the 90s, to adapt it to our Eastern European issues, to compare different issues of something that we can put today again in the frame of this decolonial discourse, which was not in use at that time. So there are actually very similar issues going on in last 30 years, but the focus slightly has been changing, and also that the language, that the terminology that is, I think it is, it is a time that we live, that the language is very much related to the social frame, which is changing more rapidly than before. We are witnessing the acceleration of time, and so for example, the very term contemporary was important in the first 2000s. There were books, texts of Groys, Terry Smith, name it. I mean, it was really the issue, and the eFlux in 2009 somehow was a part of this broader interest in the question of contemporary. So today, I think we use and we give the priority to other terms, and contemporary maybe is not so trendy, let's say, as it was at that time. I don't know, Carol, would you agree with it or not? But that's maybe for the beginning, Magda.
Yes, I wanted to add one more thing, because from both of your texts, it's very visible somehow that you both struggle with somehow like a pressure coming from the West, like in a sense, how to position yourself towards like the Western art history, the Western discourse, Western institutions that are very powerful with your own local context. And the way you are describing this Zdenka, and I think that's very interesting how you saw it at that time. And I think it's still very valid. You say that that you can do it in both ways as an as an Eastern European institution. So the first way is like is based on a mere inclusion of non-Western art through the best example in the master narrative of hegemonic institutions. So basically what the institution from our part of the world could do is basically to strive to be part of this like hegemonic narrative, but in a way also reinforcing this narrative. Like, you know, you want so much to be there, you are reinforcing that narrative. And the other example you are giving is that the second way has been to offer more possibilities for local institutions to produce knowledge about their own history. And you end this paragraph with saying, of course, these two approaches are not mutually exclusive. The only question is which of them will end up becoming dominant in the future. So reflecting from 2023, how do you see it now? Which of them is dominant or more important?
Okay. Thank you, Magda. This is very important question. Yeah, these two questions. And I always have been repeating that it's not enough or even not so relevant to talk about inclusion. How much is relevant to talk about the new paradigm in terms of different cultural production. And this is exactly what I think what happened with international, with the Confederation, because from the beginning in my work with Eastern Europe, what was the most relevant things is has been to accelerate the dialogue between different spaces, cultural environments, especially non-Western cultural environments, and to increase more equal dialogue and more equal exchange of art, intellectual ideas, social experiences, and so on. So for this, you know, the existing formats of cultural production in the museum, like blockbuster exhibitions, inclusion in the existing narratives, inclusion in the existing collection hasn't been enough. So all those things somehow required, thank you, Magda, already last time when we met, how it started. And I think this is very European conceptual art in dialogue with South American, because we thought it would be very important to compare two non-Western cultural spaces, especially conceptual art was very appropriate art that you know, would help us to understand all the questions that we were interested in. So we applied to European Union cultural program and we failed. And the explanation why we failed was in this way that the way how the institutions would collaborate was not elaborated enough. And you know, for me, this was very important moment when I recognized that the same focus should be given to the model of collaboration, or let's put it this way, of cultural production, as to the content. And this is something that in last 13 years since the foundation of the international has been crucial in my work, to understand, the crucial link between the content, the art, and material condition, and how this can be also in kind of dialectical way connected, and also to translate to something else that goes beyond these questions of inclusion.
Yes, I mean, I think this also connects to what you were talking about in terms of a language and the notions that we use. Sometimes, like, their connotation differs from context to context. And we had this discussion with Carol just before we started. We started this conversation, that the question of knowledge is also very significant for the Chinese context. Carol, I wanted to ask you now to reflect on your text, because you are writing in it very provocatively, I would say. We are only beginning to make the journey to contemporary, and so you were describing the Chinese art from the beginning of the 2000s as at the beginning of transition towards the contemporary and towards probably what is called like a Western art discourse. How do you see those things today, and how would you position Chinese art in the global context?
Thank you, Magda, and thank you, Zdenka, for as coming from the Inside Our Art Museum. I want to start by thanking both of you for joining this conversation. Maybe I can share my screen. Zdenka, if you can just temporarily, yeah, I'll just quickly share, because I prepare a few slides, which I kind of revisited. Through these slides, I revisited this moment of contributing to the IFRAX journal, which is also the kind of origin for conceptualizing this conversation that are happening today. So as Magda was introducing, this journal was conceiving, this issue of the journal was conceived in 2009, when the question was posed to a number of contributors in relation to what was contemporary art. So as Magda was saying, that contemporary art by 2009, practitioners in the mainly from IFRAX, so mainly from the North American context, they felt the necessity to kind of reflect on the formation of such a canon as contemporary art, where this was not really immediately visible, or that wasn't an issue that was very much aware among Chinese practitioners. Looking back at that moment, I also found it was a moment of kind of historicizing contemporary art among many North American and Western kind of West European kind of discourses, because around at that moment, for example, the After All was publishing a series of exhibition history publications. The Action Exhibitionist was founded to reflect on exhibition making as a form of artistic practice. There was also such book to talk about the archival turn in contemporary art. So revisiting this moment in time, I realized that it was actually a moment of thinking about the parameters of what defining contemporary art, but in the meantime, historicizing contemporary art among North American and Western European practitioners. In 2016, for example, one of my supervisors, Professor Charles Green from Melbourne University, co-authored this book about Biennale and Triennale and Documenta that create contemporary art. So it became very much a discourse about the creation and formation of contemporary as a canon, where in my context, where I practice in China, everyone was still eager to kind of embrace a model of contemporary art that is perceived as universal. There was a certain unquestioned anticipation of the contemporary art that was constructed in a way through these kind of tools of exhibition making, the rhetorics, where we assume or we internalize it as something universal. And when you are facing something that you consider universal, you develop or you acquire a kind of anxiety of self-definition. How do you define yourself against these conditions that you consider that are universal? So revisiting the text that Zdenka was writing back then, Contemporaneity as Points of Connection, it was really a very inspiring text for me to think about contemporaneity not as a term, as a concrete kind of terminology, term concept, but as a set of conditions that we can actually participate in defining. And that was really a lot of the inspirations I took away from Zdenka's text. In preparing for today's talk, I also took some quotes from her text that I found extremely relevant to my own thinking. She was saying that in her practice, in institution, in her artistic and curatorial practice, museum also was very much a field where these conditions were being questioned but not confirmed. So it also displayed to us that actually institutions and museums is not a place to confirm and recognize universal conditions, but to participate in discussing what is relevant to contemporaneity. In my essay, I went back also to the 1990s, where especially after 1989, really contemporary art emerged as a horizon for many Chinese artists. That is a horizon of being part of the global art world, being part of the contemporary discourse of art. But at the same time, what emerged together with this horizon was the rise of the art market. The rise of the art market was very much supported and pushed by government ideology. So where Chinese practitioners were thinking that the art market could become a force to support the independence of contemporary art, in fact, it was very much implemented and incorporated into this state ideology. So that was really my kind of reflection at that time. But I also was very much thinking, how do we break out of this this perception of that there is a universal model of contemporary art defined and set for us by Western discourse, and how we need to kind of prove our relevance to that discourse. So after that, it really informed and inspired me to go deep into our own local history and really to unpack a lot of existing historical narratives in China that are informed by a universal understanding of contemporary art. So I will stop here. I don't know if that answers your question, but maybe we can go on in our following discussion to discuss some of the points further.
Thank you, Carol. Zdenka, I don't know, do you want to say something to what Carol just said? I think what is really striking for us, like coming from Eastern Europe, that the question of the art market didn't really, didn't has never been a major force in the Eastern European art system. And to my understanding, it was due to the fact that through the communist past, like art was state funded, and the system of state funding basically is still the case, very unique worldwide. I would say that in Eastern Europe, that the majority of the institutions in our region are state funded, which maybe also as a consequence has the fact that the arts market is very weak. Like, I mean, like maybe it depends on a country. It's maybe very hard to generalize it that way, but it is not a driving force for sure of what constitutes contemporary art in our regions. Zdenka, you are muted.
Okay. Yeah, totally agree, Magda. So I think there is a crucial difference between China and Eastern Europe in these terms. When I was first there in China, I was really surprised, you know, how market oriented Chinese art world became. You know, so when I was first in that part of Beijing, I don't remember the name, where Ulasan Art Center is, and you know, all these galleries.
798.
Chelsea in New York, so something like that you can't see in Eastern Europe. It's I would say, you know, of course it differs from country to country. Poland is very different than Slovenia or former Yugoslav countries. In Poland, you had, you know, very early important galleries created also in the international art market. Here, not only in Slovenia, but in most of the Eastern European countries, I would say. And I always try to define, you know, the difference between, let's say, East and West, based on this very fact, because, you know, when we started to use the terms like former East and former West, I was always a little bit puzzled, because it's, I think, you know, exactly the art market is, the absence of the art market is still something that defines the Easternness of Eastern Europe, you know, because in these terms, we can find a continuation of the socialist time. So what is this that makes Eastern Europe still Eastern? I think it's exactly this continuation of the absence of the art market, and also the absence of the comparable infrastructure. I don't see many changes in these terms. In Poland, again, it's different, because, you know, I'm always surprised when I hear how much money the state gives to the culture in Poland. It's incredible comparing to other Eastern European countries. And here I will not mentioning Russia specifically, because you know, it's a very, you know, it's also what is going on now, and the stories before, and the strong private sector involvement in the Russian art world. But the rest of the post-socialist world, I think it's very much about, you know, about the absence of the art market, and also the absence of the comparable infrastructure, comparable to the dominant, still dominant and more powerful Western world. And this infrastructure includes many different things. art collections, the discursive machine, which is not only about the universities, but it's also about the publishing, about the system of different schools, the system of different interpretative fields, and the continuity, a certain continuity, which I think is very important. You know, the continuity of dealing with something, dealing with different narratives. You know, so Eastern Europe still exists also in terms of interruptions. I wrote in 2006 that text, and I also curated the exhibition Interrupted Histories, which I think is very important, where I defined the difference between East and West also in terms of absence of continuity. So why the Western narrative is so strong is due to the conditions that enabled the continuity. And here we have so many, the last.
Yeah. I mean, like, yes, in Poland, even if artists were selling during the communist past, it was not institutionalized, in a sense that even like Foxal Gallery Foundation, Foxal Gallery was state-funded, basically, even if artists occasionally sell something somewhere, even to the other to the institutions like Museum Sztuki in Łódź that was buying art of that time. But I think it would be also interesting to hear from you, Carol, like, why do you think those, in a way, comparable situations that we were in the communist past, like, develop in such an extreme different ways? So it would be great to understand why in China the situation went in a completely different direction. But I wanted to read one more or to draw your attention to one more passage from Zdenka's text, because you were talking about universalism, Carol, and at the end of your text, you, Zdenka, are writing that for you, the Museum of Modern Art serves certain universal paradigms, a master narrative. And you are referring also to how do you understand after Walter Mignolo, a term modernism as such that is not really bound to a concrete place in time, but basically to a narrative that involves colonialism and the hegemony of the Western world. While on the other hand, you are stressing that the contemporary art museum must serve the local needs as, so to speak, as an agent of decoloniality in a way. So I think this is also an important comparison that you make here. And I wanted to move on a little bit to my next question to you both, which is which was inspired by a reading of your book, Zdenka, titled Comradeship, Curating Art and Politics in the Post-Socialist Europe. And in this book, you are stressing like two moments of the 20th century history that basically defined what contemporary art is. And you are speaking about the 1960s and the 1990s as this turning point for contemporary art to emerge. And like, knowing the work of both of you, I think it would be also super interesting to hear how those two moments defined contemporary art in your two very different contexts. So Zdenka, maybe you could start.
Yeah, I can maybe show some images to illustrate more concretely the year. So as I wrote at the beginning of that text, everything is coming from my institutional practice. So, you know, I started in Moderna Galleria to work in the beginning of the 90s, and at that time that was the only and most important institution for modern and contemporary art in Slovenia. And then it became too small, sorry. And then in 2011, we opened a new venue of the same institution that we call the Museum of Contemporary Art. We got it in the former Yugoslav Army barracks. It's a long story, so to make it very short. So for us, there was a big challenge how then to conceptualize this division between the modern and contemporary. So the modernism stayed in Moderna Galleria in the old building, and we gave the space for contemporary in the Museum of Contemporary Art Metelkova that we opened in 2011. So how we conceive it, the very first exhibition in that museum was the exhibition from the collection Artist 2000 Plus that you mentioned, and it was the first collection on Eastern European art. And so I titled, and I curated that show, I titled it Presence and Present. And this is already a kind of definition how I understand the contemporary art. So presence would refer to the let's say chronological time, and it is about exactly the 60s and the 90s. We start with the collection in the Museum of Contemporary Art with the post-war avant-gardes. It means with the 60s. I would say that in that decade, the most important concepts of contemporary art today were like present. So we start our idea of what is contemporary art in the 60s, when art became more material condition orientated. We got institutional critique, we got land art, we got body art, you know, all these models of art that were very much about the conditions. And I say the conditions, the material conditions are that which makes contemporary art contemporary. And when I compare the modern and the contemporary in terms of, for example, the museum collection displays, I always say that the museum collection displays from the 20th century follow the idealistic Hegelian concept, because it was very much about this development and so on. So, but contemporary model of thinking is more materialistic. And it is very much about these material conditions. And the question also of our active role in this material condition, how we as individuals, as institutions, as artists, as communities, all this, how we can become an agent of our presence, or how we can become present. So this is the definition then, presence and present, which defines in concrete example of the Museum of Contemporary Art, that is about the art from the 60s to today as the art that deals with this kind of more materialistic orientated question, and about the art and its institution as an agent in our reality. So everything what followed was very much about this idea. So we okay, there was this division between modern and contemporary, 20th century and 21st century. but it doesn't mean that in Moderna Galleria, in the old building where we have the 20th century national collection, that there we kept this concept of modernism as a universal something, as you mentioned also, and which you know, it's I think it became really obsolete in the last 30 years. So we brought this contemporary, the concept of contemporary also in the 20th century collection. And here, you know, you can see the central room of the national collection display, where we actually try to illustrate how the imaginary of 20th century was developed through different styles. You can see the social realism and how the important events, we have the videos of 2 funerals in the same room, the funeral of King Alexander, the funeral of Tito, and then it ends somehow with Laibach song Geburt einer Nation, which is appropriation of the of this famous Queen's song, and it is very much about you know, saying that also Western, especially Western pop culture, is having these totalitarian impulses. It's not only about you know, the socialism and ideology here, but it is very much about it. And so Laibach, giving the text in German, pointed to these totalitarian impulses in different cultures, and so on, so on. I mean, it's a long story. I don't want to lecture it here, but for example, in the 20th century collection in the Museum of Modern Art, we gave one room to the partisan art, you know, which is very unique. So somehow we try to point to the fact that the National Liberation Front, Anti-Fascist Liberation Front, during the Second World War was strong also because of activating the masses, you know, in this terms of mass cultural production. And we presented the works that were created during the battles in the Second World War, in secret print houses and so on. Yeah, and then many other things we started in 2000 in unrenovated building with artists, 2000 plus collection. And then when it was renovated, we had problems with the financing. And then I wrote the manifest of repetition, and we did 9 series of repeating the same exhibition, present that we opened the museum with, but this is another long story.
Yes, I just wanted to ask about one more thing, because in one interviews I read with you, you were saying that the Balkan Wars basically made you contemporary, in a sense that made you like a present in the time you were living. And I would be interested to hear, what do you mean by that? In what way, like, Balkan Wars had made present of you, or made contemporary with the times of you?
Yeah, you know, war is such a moment that changes all of us. I think this is understandable. And you know, working in the institution in the beginning of the 90s, before the war still, we were very much about this question, how to become a part of this big international art world. So this ambition and the feeling that we are still somehow isolated created priorities. So as a young curator, I remember I did a Syria, end of 80s, beginning of the 90s, Syria of British sculptor exhibitions, you know, all these famous Kapoor and so on. So that was this kind of need to catch up, let's say. And then the war started and it completely changed my priorities. You know, I started to think, you know, what is the role of institution when there is a war? First, the war in Slovenia, which was very short, 10 days, and then it moved to Croatia and Bosnia and Herzegovina. And then we, in the last year of the war, we went with Igor Zabel and Group Irwin to Sarajevo to ask people there what would be the most appropriate way to help, you know. So we didn't want just to help, but to hear from people, you know, what they think it's important. And then we contributed this idea of the future contemporary art museum, which I can define as the Museum of Solidarity, another chapter. We can talk a lot. What are the museums of solidarity and so on. Yeah, so it changed me completely.
Yeah, but I think it's really nice that you are saying this, because right now we are facing another war on Europe, and I think what is happening to our like Ukrainian colleagues as well is exactly the same process, in a sense that this ideology or this narrative of catching up basically lost its relevance, and what they are trying to concentrate right now is to what actually is contemporary for Ukraine, and what basically is like the crucial, like what is our own heritage we could build on we could build our future on. But I would like to stop here and give a voice to Carol, and the question of 60s and the 90s. How do you reflect on this, and how do you connect it with contemporary art in China?
It's very interesting that you brought these two kind of key moments in history. After, actually, since 2013, as you were mentioning earlier, Liu Ding and I have been working on kind of re-narrating or rethinking about the history of contemporary art in China from the perspective of socialist realism, meaning that the kind of existing historical narrative in China of contemporary art often was written in the 1980s, in the mid-1980s, or after 1989. And the kind of logic, the general kind of logic behind existing narratives is that we are catching up. After a long moment of being isolated during the Cultural Revolution, we started to open ourselves to the world after 1976. And throughout the 1980s, it was a period of cultural renaissance for China, and Chinese artists were going through were catching up with the West, the 100 years in the Western art history within like a decade. And then after 1989, we are ready. We have already caught up, and then we're ready to enter into contemporary. So that's the kind of general perception of contemporary art history in China. What we try to do is actually to push this beginning day of contemporary art back to 1949. So basically the moment where the People's Republic of China is founded, where the kind of ideological context, the structure of politics in China was built for the new China, and that ideological structure remained very much present and consistent until today. So what we argue is that this new set of conditions that were generated with the founding of the People's Republic of China continue to shape and continuously shape the practice of art in China. And by recognizing this continuity in Chinese art history since 1949, we are kind of trying to recreate a conception of contemporary art in China. So the idea of about contemporary art isn't the one that is informed by a kind of Western perception of avant-garde or anti-authoritarian, anti-state, where rather the conception of contemporary art in China that we're trying to develop is one that's constantly in negotiation with the state ideology, in dialogue with the state ideology, be it when it comes into conflicts or comes into synergy. So there are different dynamics, but these dynamics always underscore the presence of the agency of the individual artist. So that is how we go about kind of considering or recreating a conception of contemporary in China. And in this new kind of narrative of art history in China, we highlighted, for example, the beginning of the 1990s, so the moment of 1961 to 1963, as a moment of slight relaxation from the complete control of state ideology. So this was a short window of moment where artistic agencies were able to be articulated and expanded to a large extent. For example, we also pinpoint the year of 1987 as a turning point in this art history. Instead of the beginning of 1990s, we pinpoint the year of 1987 in this timeline in China as a key, crucial moment of changes in contemporary art in China, meaning that after a moment of opening up and loosening up of control during the mid-1980s, by 1987, the state asserted its tighter control, and many artists that were practicing kind of more postmodern art, contemporary art as people understand them, they became absorbed into the state, and they became absorbed into the market that came later on. But these are contingencies that we all consider contemporary. I don't know if this makes sense.
Yes, it makes a lot of sense to me. I was always admiring you for like being so persistent in your research, because this was also like a kind of master narrative that I encountered when I came to China, that the 1990s was this moment, this rupture point, like, you know, when the art history in China started with the blank page. Of course, like nothing in the history starts with the blank page. And what I really liked about your research is that you tried to dig into the past to find those connections that were obviously like also neglected. And I think this is also important for us in the Eastern Europe, because as Zdenka was mentioning, there is a lot of ruptures, and socialist realism is certainly one of these ruptures in the history of Eastern Europe, where we try to get rid of this like inconvenient past about like art that was like ideologized and served political issues. So the way we treat socialist realism in the majority of institutions and narratives in Eastern Europe, that we look at it through the lens of trauma, as Boris Groys was pointing to, that it's something that that also needs or is repressed from the narrative, from the memory that you try to get rid of. But I just wondered if this is really something you can erase from your memory, especially that it is also an experience that unites like big parts of the world, like China, Eastern Europe, Latin America, Africa to some extent. And I wanted to ask you a question referring to this text of Boris Groys that I just mentioned, which was called Back from the Future. He wrote it or published it in 2003 in third text. And in this text, he is basically trying to define the specificity of art in the east of Europe. And what he says is that for him, like Eastern Europe, like its main reference is context. Like contemporary art is really context based, and you can read the same actions of artists in different contexts through a completely different lenses. And for him, the feature that distinguishes Eastern Europe from or Eastern European art from Western European art is this experience of communism, of a kind of ideology or like political system that had completely different value system that the Western democracies. And the way Groys defines it is that Eastern European societies were somehow anchored in the future, that they were basically striving to build a new society, a new like unified society in the future, and that they were living through the future. So the end of the communism was like travel back from the future. And I was very inspired through this kind of metaphor or comparison, and wanted to ask you both, if you in your curatorial practice, if you feel that this kind of distinction that that Groys made was or is somehow important for you. And the other context that Zdenka was referring to, and that speaks very much to what I just said, the notion of former East and former West as a kind of paradigm that defines our presence or maybe our future. Is that something that you feel is still relevant, or we just went beyond that, and we are living in a universal, globalized, in a way, future? Zdenka. You are muted again.
Okay, sorry. So the text that you mentioned by Groys, I think it was first published, its version, in the catalog of Artist 2000 Plus collection, the catalog that was produced in Austria, I think in 2002, when exhibition was first time traveling to the West, a special interesting story, where he mentioned, among other things, one of the specificities of Eastern European art, the collective habitus. And I think this collective habitus is very important, and it's something that stays with me today, with whatever I do. You know, so of course you can't forget your past, and you can't just neglect your future, which is always different, as the past is different. So future is something consisted of the past, present. So, and the past and present are always specific. So I mentioned, for example, my manifest on repetition, when I think I have 5 points, and one of the points, how to define the reasons for the repetition is trauma, and it's exactly this trauma, that is trauma of communism, which I always, when I speak about socialist Europe, I always say and define the differences, because we can't compare self-management Yugoslavia with the Russian bloc, for example. This is something to be emphasized also at this occasion, but doesn't matter. These are the pasts, our histories that are repeating also as traumas, not only as good experiences, but as, let's say, as something very inspirational. And I have, for example, here just by chance also the slides from my exhibition in Hamburg at Bahnhof, when I presented different art collectives from former Yugoslavia, designed in different pavilions. And I defined pavilions as the semi-autonomous spaces of art collectives in former Yugoslavia that created also kind of parallel infrastructure with the help of collective work and collective habitus that Greuze emphasized in their text. Many things were possible that otherwise wouldn't have been possible. Yeah, so I think that the future is what Greuze said is, and I agree with him. This is one of the points where we have to think still about our differences and about difference between East and West, and also to question these new terms of former East and West. So coming from many potentials from our history. So one of the crucial potentials is laying in this collective habitus and in the society of solidarity. And this is something that we are missing today. So, after the end of the Cold War, after Margaret Thatcher, there are only individuals, there is no society. We have to rethink the society, and especially the society. I mean, there is no society without solidarity and so on. So it is the legacy also of art collective that can teach us how to think the future. So this specific future is possible exactly because of the future orientated system that we had. So we were always talking about socialism, and the communism was always only a future that never realized actually, so it was our specific Eastern European modernity. And we know that the modernity is kind of process development which is only progressing from good to the better and to the best. And
yes, but on the other, I just wanted to say that on the other hand, we've heard numerous times that we are at the end. I mean, that there is nothing more, right? I mean, like what
oh,
is
yeah?
a huge,
No,
like, I mean, like
in my school,
the end,
no.
the end of history, the end of art history or whatever, like, that we are at this point, like a democracy, we reached it, we have it, and it will last forever. And in a sense, I think that this difference that we had, like with the socialist past, is that there was this ideal future we know that we were striving to, or we were going to. Right now we don't have this future anymore, like
Exactly.
in a sense that we cannot
Yeah.
even imagine it, in a sense. So
Exactly.
that's probably,
I think what we have it's exactly so after, of course, we lost our future with the end of the socialism. So what is our future after this, the end of the history and so on, is only catching up the West. So I mean, this constant process of catching up, which doesn't end. And I think that, and it was mentioned before also by Carol and you know, in terms of how we understand the contemporary. So I think as all the phenomenon are also the contemporary has this dark and, let's say, bright side. So one is the catching up and let's say modernization of the art sector and the commercialization and market and all these things. And another is you know, something that I mentioned as our presence, as you know, becoming the agents of our own presence. And I think this is also something that is linked to the idea of decolonialization, which I think is very much linked to the concept of the contemporary as we are talking about. So I would say that one of the crucial differences between modern and contemporary is that modern was conceived as universal and contemporary we think as decolonial. But again, this decolonial has to be precise, you know, because you know, it's another long discussion what it is and how to understand it today, also in the relation and in difference to the classical colonialism. We are not talking about it.
Yes. Carol?
It's very interesting that when you were talking about the future, reflecting on my own work, I feel that we have been using a lot of returns, revisits in the past decade when we are thinking about the contemporary. So in China, I now reflecting, I feel that we constantly feel the urge to return in order to perhaps move forward. We feel that if we don't return to those specific moments, if we don't unpack the kind of ideological and intellectual beddings of artistic events and artistic practices, it's very hard for us to move forward. And that has a lot to do with the fact that we feel that there's at the beginning, Zdenka was talking about the lack of infrastructure for art, or the so-called art system, as perhaps is present in the Western kind of Western European, North American context, where in China since the 1990s, we have actually developed an extremely kind of robust system, infrastructure. We have a lot of museums, we have a lot of institutions, we have very powerful market forces. But what we have been missing, and that still continuously kind of make us very anxious, is that we don't have a credible value system. We don't have a credible system of evaluating artistic and intellectual practices in China. And that has to do with the fact that we always kind of divorce art from politics, assume that art has a certain autonomy, especially we anticipate the kind of contemporary art that we understood from the 90s, from the kind of global art discourse, that contemporary art has a certain autonomy. But in the history in China since 1949, the autonomy of art is very much a kind of almost an impossible illusion, an illusion in a way, because whatever each of us does, we are so much embedded in the state ideology. It's an inescapable kind of friend for all of us. So the way to kind of rescue or to define our contemporaneity is not by saying that we are autonomous or that we have a kind of independent track of development, but to first recognize that we are very much part and parcel of this state ideology, and then to understand that being part of this ideology, what are the kind of intellectual motivations behind certain practices and certain actions in art that can kind of help us rescue this individual agency. So I think this is the kind of that's why kind of when we are talking about the contemporary, we constantly use such terms as returns, revisits, because we want to not think about art and definition of art from a stylistic sense, in the modernist arts sense, but from an intellectual sense, from a conceptual sense, how these artistic practices, whatever forms they take, whatever formal languages they take, what they manifest in terms of intellectual complexity that's embedded in the works and in the practices. So I think it's very particular perhaps to China due to the ideological kind of conditions that we are in. This is very much on our mind, that if we don't first recognize this complexity of each of our entanglement with the state ideology, then we always can only fancy that we have an independent system of value judgment, when in fact we don't have that credibility developed through the current system of art. Because the current system of art, no matter whether it's individual independent institutions supported by market power, commercial galleries, art schools, state institutions, they are all, every one of us is conditioned very much the same by this state ideology.
Yes, thank you, Carol. We have few minutes left, and I have one last question that to me like unifies your both of your curatorial practices in a way. Zdenka mentioned already the notion of solidarity, and the book that of yours that I mentioned before that is entitled Comradeship, Curating Art and Politics of in Post-Socialist Europe, you are stressing the importance of friendship in your curatorial work. And when I visited you, Carol and Liu Ting, and I had an occasion of witnessing your work on several occasions. I had also this feeling of being admitted to a circle of friends, like artist friends that you are surrounded with, that you come back and work with on numerous occasions. I wanted to ask you both about a notion of friendships, and how does it influence your curatorial work, and what does it mean to you in your professional life?
I think today we speak of certain ethics turn, you know, in the museums, in the art world, and in general, you know, after all this Me Too, Black Matter, and so on. I think it's something that we need to very seriously rethink. So what is ethics? And I think here again, I try to be very specific in terms of our own histories and legacies. And I defined ethics, and I gave the title of the book, Comradeship, um, relating to the specific experience of socialist Yugoslavia and importance of the anti-fascist struggles in the Second World War that became part of the cultural war today. And it's very important to, to keep this memory and the legacy and a very strong experience and potential from our history. So I defined our ethics as comradeship more than let's say a friendship, because it's broader. I think that comradeship includes also the friendship. There is no comradeship without the friendship. But what goes beyond it, beyond the pure friendship, is about the same visions and ideas. So we have comradeships in the war, and if you read any literature about it, you will find descriptions of very important friendships and affects. This is also very important in the comradeship, that people share affects. That there is love, there is all this friendship, and I think that is very much about the ideas that unite people intellectually and emotionally, and that goes beyond different divisions of status, expertise, class, race, ethnicity, gender. And it functions on the collective level as a society of solidarity, and also on the, of course, on the individual level, or the level of the artistic production that I try to define via working on the art collectives in former Yugoslavia. So it's about it, I think. And I think this is, Carol mentioned before, the crisis of values. I think this is very interesting and important. And I try, when you mentioned it, I try to think, what are the values here, how we can define them. And I think that something that you find among the artists of different generations today is exactly, care, solidarity as the most important values from the time we live now.
Carol?
In recent years, what I have been trying to kind of advocate in China is that many of the art museums, I work in a private art museum in China, and many of the private art museums that emerged since around 2000 with the wave of property development in China and the speed up of urbanization in China has been very much under the influence of the idea of cultural industry. So the logic behind this museum building and also the operation of the museums are very much dictated by the logic of cultural industry, where I've been trying to argue that museum art institutions should be an undertaking of cultural construction, not cultural industry. So meaning that it's a social responsibility you are paying, because under this logic of cultural industry that really is dominant in China at the moment, everyone becomes a competitor and everyone's in the industry, in the so-called industry, to gain profit or to kind of stay ahead of the game. But if we change our perception. We perceive our work as undertaking cultural construction, contributing to the general kind of social well-being, taking our own responsibility, then the horizon opens for all of us to help each other and support each other. And that really aligns with Zdenka's idea about comradeship, because I really appreciate the idea of comradeship because it comes with the purpose. It is something that we want to advocate, and we feel dearly that we want to urgently participate in. So I think this is very much a turning point in China, I feel, to really put forward the idea of cultural construction, because when every institution, every form becomes a part of cultural industry, it really kills culture and kills art, because everything is done based on the calculating logic of industry. Art museums are turning to selling spaces for commercial galleries. So no one trusts exhibitions that are put up in art museums in China, because you pay for it. And then by doing that, by everyone undermining this ethics, destroying this kind of trust in certain ethics of different roles that we play, then there is no value. We don't believe, we have nothing to fall back on. We don't trust anything. So this is, again, the crisis we are in when we don't value ideas such as comradeship or friendship in the art field.
Thank you, Carol. I think that was a really excellent end point for our discussion, and also a kind of a circle that we made throughout this 1.5 hours, because we started our discussion with this issue of how we can bring our values coming from our local context to a main narrative, or how can we make them basically universal in a way. So that was a really perfect ending point, and I think we are also we ran out of time. Thank you so much for this conversation, for your incredible input, and we will look forward to the book, right?
Yes, absolutely. We hopefully will do a publication, and Zdenka, I hope that Zdenka and Magda can both come to Beijing for the book
That
launch.
would be wonderful.
That
That
would
would be a pleasure again.
I look forward to it.
Absolutely.
We'll be in touch again. All right.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. It was a big pleasure.
Have a great Sunday.
Yeah, it was nice to see you after
Absolutely.
such a long time. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
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 好的，今天直播到此结束，欢迎大家持续关注我们北京对话后续的活动，谢谢大家。